Hi, me again. I did a bunch of readings yesterday from different Wegener's patient stories, and I have two more to go. And today my ears are a little bit funky, which was my first symptom actually, which is hilarious because I haven't felt this in a bit, but here we are. I think yesterday might have triggered some memories that I've been repressing. And then I'll tell you my story. Like I said, I've been repressing it, so I'm sure I'm going to forget a lot of stuff. But before I go there, I'm going to read you two more stories. And I'm going to start with Nicole. So this is Nicole's story. My name is Nicole. I was diagnosed with Wegener's in December of 2010 when I was 26 years old. I have lived in Southern California my whole life and currently reside in Anaheim, California, right by Disneyland. My ailment started with my sinuses, worked its way to my lungs. My lung involvement is what prompted my doctors to question Wegener's. I currently receive treatment in Irvine, California through Kaiser Permanente. As far as I can tell, my journey started towards the end of September 2010. My husband Jeff and I had been married in March of 2010 and were enjoying our new life together and looking forward to the future. I love being outdoors. I have always been pretty active. I love to walk, run, camp, hike, go to the beach, a typical Southern California girl. It all started innocently enough. I started getting a runny nose and feeling a little under the weather. I went to the doctor and was sent home with seasonal allergies and some over-the-counter medications. The first weekend of October, I attempted my first 10K race. I made it out about 2 miles and I had to turn back and abandon the race altogether. I just couldn't find the energy to complete and it felt awful. At first I attributed it to biting off more than I could chew in a race. I usually run that flat 5K courses. This was twice my regular distance and had multiple elevation changes. So I said to myself, lesson learned, stick to what you know, and didn't think much of it at first. By the time I got home from my attempted race, I was running a pretty high fever and now I felt sick. I went straight to bed and slept until my fever broke. For the next few days, I was doing all the regular at-home cold remedies. Chicken soup, saltine crackers, Gatorade, Sprite, NyQuil, all the things that usually help me get back on my feet again. When I wasn't feeling any better by the end of the week, I went to the doctor again. I was told that the colds and flus going around this year were just really strong. Get more rest and I should be better in about a week. Basically, just keep doing what I've been doing. So I did. 2 weeks later, I was still feeling horrible. I didn't think this was normal for someone my age to have a cold for this long. At this time, I had been coughing quite a bit, and one morning I started coughing up blood. This was truly alarming, so I made yet another doctor's appointment for the afternoon. The doctor I saw said that my constant coughing for weeks had caused a slight case of bronchitis, and a few specks of blood was nothing to be alarmed about. I insisted that it was more than a few specks, that I was coughing up clots of blood, and she still shrugged it off like I was being a hypochondriac. Not wanting to hear that it was something more serious, I took her word for it, and I told myself I was making more of it than it really was. Sorry. I turned it on silent, but clearly not. I was given some OTC cold medicine along the nasal spray to help with my seasonal allergies. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I was still sick. Monday, before Thanksgiving, I made yet another appointment to see another doctor because something was clearly not right. No healthy 26-year-old should have a cold for 3 months with no end in sight. I took my lunch break to go to my doctor's appointment with Dr. N and told her all my symptoms and what had brought me to her thus far. I had general cold symptoms, including fevers, runny nose, congestion, coughing, and sometimes coughing up blood, fatigue, and just plain feeling tired all the time. And I had started getting a pain in my upper right tract that got worse with deep breaths. She sent me downstairs to have a chest x-ray. When I got back to the exam room, Dr. N pulled up my x-ray on the screen and showed me some cloudiness in my lung where I had complained of back pain. After consulting with another doctor, she diagnosed me with pneumonia. Scary. But I was glad that someone had finally listened to me and I could start feeling better. I was sent home with antibiotic, an inhaler, and told to come back in 2 weeks for a follow-up chest x-ray to make sure everything was clearing up. I took the next week off work as per Dr. M's orders, rested, took in lots of fluids. Basically, I did everything I was told to do. 2 weeks later, I went to have my follow-up chest x-ray on Monday. I was still not feeling great, but with all the rest I had, I was feeling marginally better. By Wednesday, I hadn't received a call to follow up on the x-ray, so I emailed my personal physician, Dr. D, to make a follow-up appointment. If anything, I just wanted to hear that I was getting better. I went in that morning, and Dr. D came in looking somewhat confused. She asked why I had made the last-minute appointment to see her. I looked like I was doing fine. I explained to her everything that had been going on for the past couple of months, and she excused herself for a moment to review my x-rays and the other doctor's notes in my file. Since my symptoms had started in September, I had seen 4 different doctors. She came back a couple of minutes later, now looking concerned. I asked if my x-rays looked better, and she said no. She had a call out for a pulmonary specialist to take a look at them because they had not improved from the first set taken before Thanksgiving. She then went on to tell me that she was calling over to the hospital to find a room for me. She was admitting me into the hospital until they could figure out what was wrong with me. To me, this could not have come at a worse time. My best friend from high school was getting married the following weekend, and later tonight was her rehearsal dinner. I was a bridesmaid in her wedding and had to be there. I begged Dr. D not to put me into the hospital right away, but she apologized and said that she had no choice. Her first inkling was that I had tuberculosis, and being highly contagious, she couldn't, in good conscience, let me out into the general public and risk spreading it. So I called my mom and Jeff to come pick me and my car up from Dr. D's office and drive me over to the hospital. Now, Wednesday, December 8th, 2010, I was in the hospital, not really sure what was wrong with me. I honestly thought that everyone was overreacting a bit. I felt fine, or maybe it was just a version of fine that I had become accustomed to in the past few months. Because they were looking at a TB possibility, I was put in an isolation room. Only Jeff and my parents were allowed to see me. Over the next day or two, a pulmonary specialist, an infectious disease specialist, and a doctor overseeing the hospital floor came in to talk to me. They all showed me my most recent x-ray and pointed out the 3 spots in my right lung they called cavitary lesions. They went on to explain that this could be a number of different things: tuberculosis or a fungus, spore growing in my lung that could be cleared up with antibiotic, or something more serious like lung cancer. Luckily, I didn't hear that part when I was in the hospital. My mom told me about it later. With so much information being thrown at you, it's easy to miss parts here and there. Thankfully, I had Jeff and Mom there to listen when I couldn't and fill in the blanks. By Friday, they had been running all sorts of blood tests, and I had been giving sputum samples to be tested for TB. They were also going to send me for a CT-guided lung biopsy to try and figure out what exactly those lesions were. When my pulmonary specialist, Dr. C, came in to see me Friday afternoon, he was giving me a rundown of what they knew so far and said hopefully when they came back Monday, they would have an answer for me. This meant they expected me to be in the hospital all weekend. I again became overwhelmingly upset and tried through my tears to explain to Dr. C that my best friend's wedding was Sunday and I couldn't miss this important event in her life. She was counting on me. Through my hysterics, my nose started bleeding profusely. Dr. C was shocked. He asked me why I had not listed this as a symptom before. I told him I had only had one other bloody nose in the past couple of months, but everyone gets bloody noses, especially in the dry weather this time of year, and thought nothing of it. He said he'd be right back and came back about 5 minutes later with a test result and a diagnosis. He told me, you have Wegener's granulomatosis, and briefly explained that it was an autoimmune disease that would explain my sinus symptoms and cavitary lesions in my lung, and positive C-ANCA blood tests he held in his hand. He said that the lung biopsy would confirm his diagnosis, but he was 90% certain, and this is what I had. Thinking that I was in the hospital for no real reason, this was shocking news. I still didn't really believe it. The infectious disease doctor came back Friday evening before I was scheduled for my biopsy, and he assured me that he thought I had a fungus, not Wegener's. I was a bit relieved to hear that, but still petrified that he was wrong. A rheumatologist, Dr. M, was contacted to come and see me on Saturday morning. She went over my symptoms and gave me a quick checkup. and started explaining my treatment options for me. At this point, my head was still reeling from all that had transpired in the last 24 hours. I told Dr. M that I wasn't ready to hear anything until my lung biopsy came back with a diagnosis. She was reluctant but understood and said we could talk about it in a week when my results came back. After all this, I had finally been cleared of TB, taken out of isolation, and was being prepped for discharge from the hospital. Around 4 p.m. on Saturday, I finally got to the car to go home. I was barely able to meet my friend and the other bridesmaids that night to make our bouquets, but I made the wedding the next day. Although weak and not myself, I was so glad to be there and not miss this milestone in her life. She had been in my wedding only months before. I wanted to return the favor as best I could. The next 2 weeks were the hardest I have ever gone through. I hadn't read anything on Wegener's up to the point of my friend's wedding. So after Jeff and I got home, I sat down and looked it up. This was a mistake in hindsight. The first thing I read was from Wikipedia, and this is what I saw. Wegener's granulomatosis is a form of vasculitis, inflammation of blood vessels that affects the lungs, kidneys, and other organs. Due to its end organ damage, it is life-threatening and requires long-term immunosuppression. 5-year survival is up to 87%, with some mortality due to toxicity of treatment. It is named after Dr. Friedrich Wegener, who described the disease in 1936. When I read this, I saw 5-year survival and thought I had up to 5 years to live. This was devastating. I'm 26 years old. Jeff and I haven't even been married for a year. We wanted to start a family. How could this happen to us? We both sat down and cried for what seemed like hours. Now it was a waiting game. My biopsy wouldn't be back for another week, and I just had to pray that they were wrong about my initial diagnosis. I just couldn't believe this was happening. That following Thursday, I went to see Dr. C for the first time after getting out of the hospital. He gave me the results of my biopsy. Inconclusive. This was a big letdown. We were expecting to make a big decision based on the results of this test. He said regardless of the biopsy, he was still diagnosing me with Wegener's based on my symptoms and positive Cianca test. At this point, I had to accept it. I had spent a week hoping for a miracle, but there was no denying it at this point. I have Wegener's granulomatosis, and in a weird way, it was comforting to hear a diagnosis, even though it was hard to hear. At least now I can start treatment and recovery. My mom and Jeff were at this appointment with me. I think they both needed to hear the doctor say the words as much as I did. Jeff and I had another bout of crying and getting all our emotions out when we got into the car, and I met my mom at home and cried with her. And later that day, when my dad got home, we cried again. As upset as I was about everything, what upset me the most in the beginning was the guilt I felt for putting my family through all of this. I am an extremely self-sufficient person, and I hated being a burden on them, not only because I wasn't strong enough to do anything for myself physically, but I felt like an emotional burden as well. It took me weeks to accept that this happened to me, and there's nothing that I could do to change it. After leaving Dr. C's office, I started on 60 milligrams of prednisone daily per his orders until I discussed my other options with my rheumatologist. At the advice of my doctors, before deciding on what treatment I would go through, Jeff and I made an appointment to meet with a fertility specialist, Dr. T. This was the hardest part of my diagnosis for me. We're newlyweds, and we talked about starting a family almost every day. 2011 was going to be all about babies for us. So on Monday morning, we drove down to Dr. T's office. He explained that given the toxicity of my future treatment, the most viable option for us would be to preserve embryos. However, this process would take about 6 weeks, and for those of you who know anything about how fast Wegener's can take a turn for the worse, 6 weeks is too long without any treatment. It was also not covered by insurance and was extremely costly. To add insult to injury, the most common treatment, cyclophosphamide, would most likely put me into an early menopause from which I have a 50-50 chance of recovering from. So even if we spent the thousands of dollars I went through the highly invasive procedure of preserving my eggs, we only had a 50-50 shot that I may ever be able to carry them. On top of that, having Wegener's already puts me in the high-risk pregnancy category, and I may never be able to carry a baby full term. My body just may not be strong enough to handle it. After leaving the fertility doctor, very sad and disheartened, Jeff and I met up with my mom and we headed down to my first official appointment with my rheumatologist. We told Dr. M what had been explained to us and asked about some other options we read about online. Rituximab is a newer medication used in rheumatoid arthritis that doesn't affect fertility. But there's only about 5 years of research with Wegener's patients done to back it up. My husband, being the wonderful man he is, told me that it is my body and he would support any decision I made regarding my treatment. We talked about it and decided to go with the tried and true method of cyclophosphamide as my main immunosuppressant. As of January 3rd, I started my cyclophosphamide at 100 milligrams per day, and 2 weeks later was up to a full dose of 150 milligrams per day. I take this concurrently with Bactrim and prednisone. Within a week or two, I started feeling exponentially better. My sinuses were not as inflamed, my breathing was less labored, and I started to get a little bit of energy back. Not quite back to my old self, but I am now able to do some chores around the house and get through the workday without a nap. And every week seems better than the week before, but hopefully not as good as tomorrow. It took about 2 to 4 weeks for me to start feeling the side effects of my medication. The prednisone had caused me to gain weight. My face looked swollen, for lack of a better word. I started getting acne and mood swings like I was a teenager again. Some other common side effects of prednisone are insomnia and acid reflux. I have been fortunate to only experience these minimally. The cyclophosphamide made me more tired than usual, and I get upset stomach and nausea. I go in for weekly blood tests to monitor my disease activity and how my body is responding to the medications. All in all, I think I have tolerated the drugs pretty well. In my first week of treatment, I had a bad reaction with my Bactrim and cyclophosphamide. I woke up in sweats and excruciating joint pain in my legs. All in all, I think I have tolerated the drugs pretty well. In my first week of treatment, I already said that. I'm still in the midst of my initial treatment, but things have already started to improve. In mid-January, I had another chest x-ray done, and the nodules in my right lung had already begun to heal. My rheumatologist has also been slowly weaning me off prednisone as my symptoms decrease week by week. In the beginning, I had mostly bad days, both physically and emotionally, to the point that getting out of bed seemed like a waste of time. What was the point? As I started to feel a little better and read more about Wegener's, I realized that there was still so much in my life to be thankful for. I realized that people do recover from this disease and thrive, and there was no reason why I couldn't be one of them. I started looking forward to things again and focusing on the positive things around me. My husband and family helped a lot with this, but a huge help was the Wegener's Granulomatosis Disease Support Forum. To someone who has never been diagnosed with a rare, potentially life-threatening illness, it is hard to describe the sense of helplessness and isolation you feel. As much as my family was there to support me, I still felt alone, like no one understood what I was going through. When Jeff showed me this site, at first I was hesitant to check it out, but after a few weeks, I started reading daily, as I still do. To have someone to talk to who knows what I'm going through on a personal level is incredibly helpful. Their support and advice has been truly invaluable in my recovery process. My advice to anyone who is being diagnosed with Wegener's or thinks they may have Wegener's: trust your instincts. You know your body, and if you think something is wrong, speak up. Don't let someone tell you it's nothing if you feel in your heart that something isn't right. I would also advise anyone who thinks they're having symptoms of Wegener's, keep a small journal and write down how you are feeling on a daily basis. This way, when you do meet with a medical professional, you can accurately explain to them everything you have experienced and get the proper treatment as soon as possible. For anyone who has been recently diagnosed, chin up. It's hard in the beginning, and you will have bad days, but you will also have good days, and you will get better. Take your bad days in stride, and when you're feeling good, do something you enjoy to take your mind off of all the craziness that Wegener's brings. After being diagnosed, I had a hard time getting back to everyday activities. Coming home for the first time, going back to work, I looked around, saw pictures of myself from when I was healthy and carefree, and it made me really sad. But day by day, I realized how important a sense of normalcy can be. Getting back to your regular life prior to diagnosis is a huge stepping stone that no one tells you about, but it is so important. Lastly, talking about my disease and experience has helped me cope with having Wegener's. Every time I explained Wegener's to someone new, I understood it a little better myself, and sometimes I was asked questions that prompted me to do more research. With every person I told, it became easier to talk about it and a little easier to accept. Stay positive and take it one day at a time. In closing, I would like to thank my husband Jeff for being so supportive. I think the next book should be about being married to a Weggie. It is a roller coaster of emotions for our spouses and loved ones too, but they don't have any medication to help them through it. I'm kidding, of course, but they really deserve credit for putting up with all the changes and side effects that Wegener's brings and loving us in spite of it. I would also like to thank my parents, my mom, for always being that voice in my head that makes me question everything. It led me to a diagnosis, and my dad for being a positive example of strength and recovery in my life. And lastly, I want to thank Dr. Chan. He has been on top of my case since day one and has always been honest with me, even when I didn't want to hear it. And I can't express enough how grateful I am for that. That's Nicole's story. It is so similar to everybody else's stories. I read it and I feel like I'm reading my own thing, which is, to her point, why I think we need to talk to other people who are going through the same thing, because you hear their stories and you hear your own story inside of them. And it's a wild ride. It really is a wild ride. So thank you, Nicole. I hope this was more than 12 years ago, so I hope that in her life is no Wegener's and maybe a little baby somewhere in there. So thank you again for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Sorry for the interruptions.